An extreme close-up of a vintage analog alarm clock on a bedside table. The red second hand ticks loudly and rhythmically, cutting through the silence. Sarah, 20s, disheveled, is fast asleep in a tangled mess of sheets. The ambient, sickly yellow light bathes her face, which is tense even in sleep. The clock face again. The time jumps forward instantly, missing several minutes. The ticking sound momentarily distorts into a low, metallic groan. Sarah abruptly snaps awake, gasping as if waking from a nightmare. She sits up, staring into the dark corners of the room, her eyes wide with unplaced anxiety. A slow panning shot of the seemingly normal studio apartment. Kitchenette on the left, bed in the center, an old TV across. Dust motes dance in the weak light. Sarah, still in bed, rubs her eyes. She looks toward where the bathroom door should be, located in a shadowed hallway. The view flips to Sarah's perspective. The bathroom door is there, but a thin curl of unexplainable frost is forming along the top edge of the frame. Sarah blinks, looks away, then looks back. The frost is gone, leaving only moisture. She shivers, assuming she is hallucinating from lack of sleep. Sarah slowly swings her legs out of bed. As her bare feet touch the floorboards, a quiet, sickening squelch sound is heard. She quickly lifts her foot, confused. She wipes it on the sheet, but the floor now appears perfectly dry. She frowns, deeply unsettled. Sarah stands up and walks toward the kitchenette. As she passes a wall-mounted mirror, her reflection appears to stand still for a microsecond longer than she does. A close-up of Sarah's face as she freezes, sensing the discrepancy. She slowly turns her head back toward the mirror. She stares at her reflection. It matches her movements perfectly now. She touches her face in the glass, leaving a smudge on the dust. Shaking her head to clear it, she continues to the kitchenette and reaches for the faucet to fetch a glass of water. She turns the handle. Instead of water, a thick, tar-like black substance oozes out slowly, accompanied by a wet, sucking sound. Sarah drops the glass in horror, backing away instantly into the dark center of the room. The glass shatters silently. She looks at the sink again. The black sludge is gone. The faucet is dry. Her breathing becomes rapid, bordering on a panic attack. Realizing she needs fresh air to calm down, Sarah decides to open the heavy velvet curtains covering the main window. She grabs the edges of the curtains with both hands, taking a deep breath before pulling them open. With a violent tug, she throws the curtains open. Instead of glass and a city view, there is only a raw, solid, floor-to-ceiling brick wall, sealing the window completely. Sarah reaches out, her fingertips trembling as they graze the rough, cold surface of the bricks. The mortar is still damp. Panic surges. Sarah turns and sprints toward the apartment's front door, her feet thumping heavily on the floorboards. She grabs the brass door handle and twists it violently, but it refuses to budge, as if welded shut. In a frenzy, she kicks the door. The wood splinters, revealing not a hallway but the same suffocating red brick. Sarah stumbles back, her hands flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. The apartment feels like it's shrinking. The vintage clock on the bedside table begins to tick faster, the sound echoing like a hammer against an anvil. Sarah frantically checks the small bathroom door. She flings it open, her face illuminated by the flickering fluorescent light inside. Inside the bathroom, the mirror has been replaced by more bricks. The sink is filled with a layer of fine, gray dust. Sarah collapses against the bathroom wall, sliding down to the floor as the reality of her tomb sets in. A sudden loud clatter comes from the main room. Sarah freezes, her breath hitching in her throat. She creeps back into the main room. The coffee table that was in front of the sofa is gone. Only the dust outline remains. Sarah looks at the spot where the table was, her mind reeling. She looks toward the bed. The pillows have also vanished. The ticking of the clock stops abruptly. The silence that follows is heavy and deafening. A faint, rhythmic scratching sound begins behind the brick wall where the window used to be. Sarah approaches the wall, pressing her ear against the cold brick. Her eyes are wide, searching for a sound she doesn't want to hear. From behind the brick, a voice, a perfect, distorted mimic of her own, whispers her name. Sarah. She recoils from the wall, tripping over the edge of the rug and falling onto the floor. While on the floor, she notices the light under the front door, the bricked one, is being blocked by a moving shadow. The shadow doesn't walk away. It begins to bleed through the mortar, a black smoke-like substance seeping into the room. Sarah crawls backward, away from the door. as the black smoke begins to coil and take a vague, humanoid shape. Sarah lunges for the bedside lamp, gripping it like a club. Her knuckles are white, her breath ragged, and her eyes scan the dark corners for the smoke entity. The smoke entity suddenly collapses into the floorboards, disappearing into the cracks like spilled ink, leaving a faint smell of ozone. Silence returns, but the room feels heavier. Sarah spins around, checking every corner of the increasingly bare studio. The kitchenette cabinets have vanished into flat brick. A sharp, mechanical click echoes. Sarah looks up as the ceiling light fixture begins to hum and vibrate with an unnatural frequency. From the edges of the light fixture, rusted metal gears begin to emerge, grinding against the plaster and raining debris onto the floor. The floor beneath Sarah's feet lurches violently. The entire room tilts 5 degrees, sliding her toward the bricked-up window as gravity distorts. She slams into the brick wall. A single brick near her face vibrates, then slides inward into a dark, bottomless void. Sarah cautiously peers into the hole. Inside, she sees a vast, infinite clockwork mechanism of brass and bone, churning in the darkness. A giant, wet eye suddenly rolls into view on the other side of the hole, staring directly at her with an intelligent, cold malice. Sarah screams and stumbles away. She grabs her smartphone from the floor, her only remaining link to the outside world, but the signal bar is replaced by a ticking clock icon. The phone screen flickers to life, showing a live video feed of Sarah from behind, sitting on her bed exactly 3 minutes ago. The video on the phone accelerates. It shows Sarah in the future, her body becoming skeletal and her skin turning to brass as the room shrinks. The phone suddenly grows burning hot in her hand. She drops it as the glass and plastic melt into a puddle of liquid brass on the rug. The sound of a jeweler's hammer tink, tink, tink starts coming from underneath the floorboards, rhythmic and precise. Sarah retreats to the bed, the only safe place left, only to realize the mattress has shrunk to the size of a child's cot. She looks down at her hands in the dim light. Her fingernails are transforming into small, flathead brass screws. A rhythmic wheeze fills the room, the sound of massive bellows. The air turns a hazy, suffocating blue as the oxygen thins. A shadow stretches across the brick wall, a silhouette of a tall figure wearing a top hat, holding a massive, sharp pair of tweezers. The shadow reaches out and plucks the shadow of the lamp from the wall. In the real room, the physical lamp vanishes instantly with a metallic spark. Sarah stands alone in the center of the room. The walls have closed in until they are only 6 feet apart, forming a perfect brick box. Sarah presses her palms against the brick walls. The texture has changed. They are now as cold and smooth as polished steel, though they still look like red brick. The ceiling groans and drops another 3 inches. Sarah is forced to hunch over, the grinding of rusted gears overhead becoming deafening. Sarah looks at her forearm. Beneath the skin, tiny circular bumps begin to move, rotating like internal clockwork gears. She tries to scratch at her arm in a panic, but her skin feels like stiff parchment. Her blood, where she breaks the skin, is a thick golden clock oil. The clockmaker whispers from all sides of the wall simultaneously, "Nearly time." The air in the room begins to shimmer with intense heat. A massive, razor-sharp brass pendulum swings through a slit in the ceiling, slicing the air inches from Sarah's face. The pendulum swings again. This time, it passes through the shadow of Sarah's legs on the wall. Sarah collapses as her physical legs momentarily lose all solidity, turning into a heap of loose brass springs and wires before snapping back to human form. A single brick in the wall slides out like a drawer, revealing a row of precision watchmaking tools, needles, tweezers, and a small, glowing hammer. The invisible clockmaker picks up the tweezers. We see the tool float in midair, clicking rhythmically as it moves toward Sarah's eye. Sarah bats the tool away, but her hand passes right through it as if it's a hologram. The tool continues its steady, mechanical approach. The walls of the room begin to glow with blue, luminescent blueprints, showing the complex mechanical schematics of Sarah's own heart. The ticking of the clock now vibrates through the floor. Sarah realizes the tick is coming from the soles of her feet. A massive winding key, 2 feet long and made of iron, slowly descends from the ceiling gears, pointing directly at a hole forming in Sarah's upper back. Sarah scrambles into the corner, but the bricks begin to soften and stretch like chewing gum, wrapping around her arms to pin her in place. As she is held, her clothes begin to harden and turn into blue-tinted parchment, covered in tiny, handwritten equations and measurements. The room begins to rotate. Sarah is spun upside down, but the blood, gold oil doesn't rush to her head. It stays in her chest, pooling around a central gear. From the dark corners, hundreds of tiny, mechanical moths made of copper and glass fly out, their wings sounding like the clicking of 1,000 watches. The moths land on her skin and begin to sew her mouth shut with thin, silver wire, their movements robotic and precise. The ceiling gears stop grinding. A heavy, final thud sounds as a giant XII-12 is seared into the brick wall in front of Sarah in glowing red heat. The glowing red XII on the wall begins to rotate slowly, like a vault dial. As it turns, the sound of heavy metal tumblers clicking into place vibrates through Sarah's bones. The brick walls suddenly become translucent, revealing that Sarah is suspended in the center of a giant, hollowed-out clock tower. Thousands of gears spin in the darkness beyond the walls. Sarah tries to scream through the silver wire gag, but the sound that emerges is a high-pitched steam whistle, and white vapor escapes from her nostrils. The massive iron winding key finally makes contact with the keyhole in Sarah's back. A sickening metallic clunk echoes as it seats itself into her spine. The key begins to turn. With each rotation, Sarah's body jerks rhythmically, and the sound of a heavy spring being tensioned fills the tiny space. The floorboards beneath her dissolve into a fine metallic sand. Sarah is left suspended in midair, held only by the bricks and the winding key. The swarm of mechanical moths returns, clustering together to form the vague, three-dimensional shape of a tall man in a frock coat standing in the void. Sarah's eyes undergo a horrifying change. Her pupils dilate and transform into rotating gear-shaped apertures, flickering with a faint internal light. The brick walls begin to unzip vertically. Lines of mortar pull apart like a zipper, revealing the clockmaker's workshop on the other side, a room filled with Sarah prototypes. The transition to active terror is complete. The clockmaker's moth hand reaches up from the void and gently strokes Sarah's cheek, leaving a trail of fine brass shavings. The entity's moth form collapses and reappears instantly behind Sarah, its elongated shadow swallowing her own. Sarah's arms are jerked upward by invisible wires. She is forced to mimic the movements of a clock's hands, left arm at 9, right arm at 12. The entire back wall of the apartment falls away, tumbling into the abyss. Sarah is now perched on a single, massive gear that serves as the new floor. A phantom door made of shimmering light appears 10 feet away across the void. It looks like the exit to her real apartment building. As Sarah lunges for the door, the hallway inside the light distorts, turning into a long, throat-like tunnel made of grinding teeth and clock springs. The remaining brick walls turn into jagged mirrors. Every reflection shows a different stage of Sarah's mechanical transformation. Some are already full robots. The clockmaker finally speaks in a voice like grinding stones. The second hand is caught. He points a long, needle finger at Sarah's chest. A close-up of the clockmaker's needle finger touching the center of Sarah's chest. The skin doesn't bleed. It cracks like a porcelain eggshell. The perspective shifts violently. The 3D world flattens into a 2D blueprint. Sarah is now a drawing on a piece of aged parchment, her lines vibrating in terror. A giant, physical compass tool slams into the parchment, pinning the drawn Sarah by her heart as the paper begins to burn from the edges. The burning parchment tears open from the center. Sarah's real hand, now tipped with brass needles, rips through the paper back into the three-dimensional room. Sarah tumbles onto the floor. The room has shrunk again. The walls are now so close she can touch opposite sides by extending her arms. The bricks begin to pulse in and out rhythmically, like a giant stone lung. The sound of heavy breathing emanates from the mortar. Sarah looks at her reflection in a small, cracked shard of glass on the floor. Her jaw is now hinged with visible brass screws. The clockmaker's voice echoes, not from the air but from inside Sarah's own chest. Precision is painful. The last piece of furniture, a wooden stool, suddenly twists and folds itself like origami into a complex, ticking gear assembly. Sarah tries to scream, but only the sound of a ticking metronome comes out of her throat. Each tick produces a puff of blue smoke. She begins to frantically claw at the bricks with her needle fingers. They leave deep metallic gouges in the stone, but the wall heals instantly. A hidden door, no larger than a book, opens in the floor. A tiny mechanical hand reaches out, holding a silver winding key. Sarah reaches for the key, but the floor turns into a conveyor belt, pulling her away toward the back wall. The back wall opens like a massive eye, the iris made of concentric circles of rotating blades. Sarah grabs a pipe on the wall to stop herself. The pipe is warm and soft, feeling like a human vein. The ceiling begins to rain time, thousands of tiny glass watch crystals that shatter upon hitting Sarah. Sarah sees her shadow on the wall. It has already been completely transformed into a clockwork automaton. The room's temperature drops instantly. Sarah's breath freezes into tiny, gear-shaped ice crystals that float in the air. The clockmaker finally manifests physically in the room, but he is made of the very brick Sarah was trying to escape. He reaches out a brick hand and touches Sarah's forehead. A small 404 is branded into her skin in glowing embers. The room begins to vibrate so violently that the bricks start to liquefy, turning into a whirlpool of red clay and brass. Sarah finds herself standing on the minute hand of a giant clock face, suspended over a void of infinite gears. The clockmaker stands at the center of the clock face, his hand on the winding mechanism. He looks at her and says, "1 minute left." Sarah tries to crawl along the giant minute hand, but the metal surface is slick with leaking golden clock oil, making every movement a treacherous slide toward the edge. The second hand of the giant clock, a jagged, rusted iron blade, sweeps past Sarah with a deafening whoosh, missing her by mere inches and showering her in sparks. Sarah looks down at her chest. A circular section of her ribcage has become translucent, revealing a complex, ticking heart made of ivory gears and silver springs. The 404 brand on Sarah's forehead pulses with a rhythmic red heat, syncing perfectly with the heavy thump-tick of the giant clock tower. Sarah spots a small, porcelain lever protruding from the center of the clock face. She lunges for it, but the swarm of mechanical moths forms a barrier of buzzing metal. The glass surface of the clock face beneath her feet begins to spiderweb and shatter. Shards of glass float upward, suspended by an unseen magnetic force. Sarah loses her footing and falls through the shattered glass, plunging into a dense thicket of massive, coiled brass springs that break her fall. The springs begin to tighten around her limbs like constricting snakes, their metallic coils clicking as they adjust to her shape. The clockmaker's true face appears in the darkness above her, not one face, but a shifting mosaic of hundreds of stolen human faces made of porcelain and brass. The environment shifts again. Sarah is suddenly back in her apartment, but it is now only 3 feet wide, a vertical coffin of bricks and gears. A framed childhood photo of Sarah appears on the wall, but her face in the photo has been replaced by a blank, brass plate with a keyhole. Sarah tries to cry out, but her voice is a distorted, backmasked recording of her own childhood laughter playing through a hidden speaker in her throat. A massive, pale hand made of porcelain shards reaches through the brick wall, offering Sarah a small, ornate gold key. Sarah takes the key. As her fingers touch the metal, her entire hand turns into a masterpiece of ivory and brass filigree. The brick walls start to sweat the golden clock oil, the liquid pooling at Sarah's feet and rising rapidly, filling the narrow shaft. As the oil reaches her chest, Sarah sees her reflection in the liquid. The 404 brand on her head is now a countdown, 0059. The ceiling of the shaft opens, revealing a giant, ticking watch face looking down like an indifferent god. Gravity reverses. Sarah is suddenly standing on the ceiling watch face, the golden oil now raining up toward her like heavy metallic tears. The bricks begin to whisper in 1,000 different voices, reciting every mistake and regret Sarah has ever had, the sound layering into a chaotic drone. A massive, needle-thin hand reaches up from the void beneath the gears and grabs Sarah's ankle, pulling her down into the machinery. Sarah is dragged through the narrow gap between 2 massive, rotating brass gears. Her metallic skin shrieks against the bronze as she is pulled into the dark subfloor. She lands on a conveyor belt of human teeth. Above her, hundreds of robotic arms with needle points are stitching together a new version of her body. Sarah sees a row of glass jars. Inside one, her own real beating human heart is suspended in golden oil, connected to a ticking stopwatch. The clockmaker's shadow looms over the belt. He holds a large magnifying glass over Sarah's face, distorting her features into a terrifying, oversized mask of pain. Sarah finds a surge of adrenaline. She kicks a mechanical arm, causing it to puncture a steam pipe. A blast of white vapor blinds the clockmaker. She rolls off the belt into a pile of discarded clock hands. They are sharp as razors, and as she moves, they slice into her clothes, revealing the gears now hidden in her thighs. The countdown on her forehead accelerates. 0030. The red glow is so bright it illuminates the entire dark subchamber in a rhythmic, bloody pulse. She spots a ladder made of human bone leading back up toward the apartment floor. She begins to climb, the bone rungs groaning under her metallic weight. A giant pendulum swings through the ladder, shattering a bone rung just as Sarah's hand leaves it. She dangles by one arm over the void. She hauls herself through the floorboards back into the apartment. The room is now only a 4x4 foot square. The walls are no longer brick. They are solid, moving clock faces. The climax begins. The four walls begin to converge, the glass of the clock faces cracking under the pressure. Sarah is trapped in the center of a literal vice. The clockmaker's porcelain hand bursts through the XII on the front wall, reaching for the winding key in Sarah's back. Sarah grabs the gold key she took earlier. She realizes it isn't a key for a door, but a key to reset herself. She jams it into the keyhole on her own chest. As she turns the key, the entire room begins to spin in the opposite direction. The sounds of grinding metal reverse into a high-pitched, harmonic hum. The clockmaker lets out a horrific mechanical screech. His body, made of moths and bricks, begins to unravel into thousands of tiny, harmless springs. Sarah's body begins to shed its metallic shell. Plates of brass and ivory fall to the floor, revealing raw, human skin underneath. The 404 on her forehead fades to a dull gray and then disappears completely as the countdown hits 0000. The brick walls around her explode outward into dust, revealing not the abyss but her original studio apartment bathed in the first light of dawn. Sarah stands in the center of the room, breathing deeply. She looks at her hands. They are human. But as she breathes, a tiny, faint tick is heard from her chest. She walks to the window and looks out at the city. Everyone on the street below is moving in perfect, synchronized, mechanical unison. The clock hasn't stopped. It's just gotten bigger. Sarah frantically grabs the window handle, desperate to feel the morning air, but the handle is cold, heavy, and shaped like a massive brass winding key. She pulls the window open, but there is no breeze. The city outside is silent, and she sees a giant, rusted gear protruding from the side of a neighboring skyscraper. A pedestrian below stops mid-stride. Their head snaps 360 degrees with a loud metallic crack, looking directly up at Sarah's window. Sarah recoils, slamming the window shut. The glass doesn't reflect the room. It reflects a vast, empty warehouse where her apartment is just one of thousands of wooden boxes. The morning sun in the sky flickers and dies. A giant hatch in the sky closes, revealing that the sun was merely a high-powered stage lamp. The wallpaper in the studio begins to peel away in long, vertical strips, revealing that the walls are made of interlocking copper plates etched with dates and times. Sarah looks at her wrist. Where her pulse should be, a small glass window has formed under the skin, showing a tiny escapement wheel spinning frantically. She runs to her front door and flings it open. Instead of the hallway, she faces a mirror image of herself, standing in the exact same pose, in the exact same room. Both Sarahs reach out to touch each other. As their fingertips meet, the doppelganger shatters into a cloud of fine, black soot and tiny metal filings. The soot begins to swirl, forming the words "Time is up" in midair before falling to the floor and burning holes through the wood. The floorboards begin to retreat into the walls like a retractable stadium floor, leaving Sarah balanced on a single, narrow wooden beam over the dark void. From the darkness below, the clockmaker rises, but he is now a colossal entity made of the entire city's architecture, buildings for limbs, streetlights for eyes. The entity's voice is a deafening roar of grinding metal. You are the missing part. He reaches out a finger made of a subway car. Sarah realizes her reset didn't work. It merely synchronized her. She looks down as her legs fuse together into a single, pointed brass needle. The 404 on her forehead reappears, but now it reads -0001, -0002, counting backward into a negative dimension of time. The room's four walls collapse inward, but instead of crushing her, they fold into a tiny, ornate watch case that she is now the center of. Sarah is now the second hand. She is forced into a rhythmic, jerking motion, her body snapping 6 degrees every second. The clockmaker leans in, his giant, city-sized eye filling the entire horizon. He uses a pair of tweezers made of 2 skyscrapers to adjust her position. Sarah's face finally loses all emotion. Her eyes turn into static golden orbs. She stops resisting and begins to hum the same rhythm as the gears. The view zooms out rapidly, showing Sarah as a tiny component inside a pocket watch held by a normal-looking man in a modern-day coffee shop. The man in the coffee shop sips his latte, the steam rising in a normal, airy swirl. The pocket watch on the table beside him vibrates with a muffled, frantic scratching sound. A macro shot through the watch's glass face. Inside, amongst the gears, a microscopic Sarah is seen pressing her face against the crystal, her mouth open in a silent, tiny scream. The man's hand, which has subtle, carved wooden grain patterns in the skin, picks up the watch and snaps the lid shut with a definitive metallic clink. Total darkness inside the watch. Only the sound of Sarah's frantic breathing and the rhythmic, booming thump-tick of the master gear. A match strikes in the dark. The clockmaker's porcelain face is illuminated from below, casting monstrous shadows against the interior walls of the watch. He turns the flame toward Sarah. She is now no more than 6 inches tall, sitting on a bed made of rusted needles in a miniature replica of room 404. The clockmaker reaches in with a pair of silver precision tweezers and gently removes Sarah's mechanical eye, leaving a hollow, glowing socket. He places the eye onto a velvet-lined tray filled with hundreds of identical glowing gold orbs, the souls of previous rooms. The clockmaker begins to clean Sarah with a stiff brush, his movements methodical and devoid of any emotion. He picks up a new unit. A man named Markan places him into a freshly bricked-up box labeled Room 405. Inside Room 405, Mark snaps awake on the same tangled sheets Sarah once used. The room looks perfectly normal, the curtains closed. Mark walks toward the window. The camera pans down to his bare feet. As he steps, the floorboards let out a faint, rhythmic tick. Mark reaches for the curtain. We see the 404 brand, now 405, already beginning to scar his neck in a faint, red heat. He pulls the curtains open. The raw, solid red brick wall is revealed. Mark's reflection in the brick, now metallic, shows Sarah's face staring back at him from the masonry. The camera pulls back through the walls of the apartment, then through the building, revealing the apartment complex is a massive vertical rack of room boxes. The clockmaker is seen from a distance, a colossal figure standing in the center of this library of rooms, winding a master key that reaches to the ceiling. Sarah's mechanical head is now mounted on the wall of the clockmaker's workshop, her mouth used as a holder for a ticking pendulum. Her one remaining eye, a flickering lens, slowly pans to the left, following the viewer as they exit the room. The screen begins to fill with digital static and the sound of 1,000 watches ticking in unison, faster and faster, until it reaches a deafening crescendo. Total silence and a pitch-black screen. The words "System Error. 404 Soul Not Found" appear in a cold, flickering green terminal font.